The morning air over Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, Virginia, was sharp enough to sting the lungs. The ocean wind carried the scent of salt and diesel, and beyond the docks, gray waves crashed against the training barges. The sun had barely risen, but the base was already alive with motion. Boots pounding asphalt, whistles blaring, instructors barking orders. It was just another day in one of the most grueling military environments in the world. Among the rows of men in gray-blue fatigues stood Lieutenant Elena Brooks, the only woman in her training group, and one of only a handful ever to attempt this level of Navy SEAL integration. Her presence alone drew eyes. Some looked curious, some skeptical, a few outright hostile. She could feel it like static in the air, the unspoken challenge, the question on everyone's mind. Does she belong here? She ignored it. She had learned long ago that attention was just another obstacle to manage. Her dark hair was tied tightly beneath her cap, and her sharp hazel eyes focused straight ahead, refusing to meet the gazes of those trying to test her resolve. When the whistle blew, she joined the others in a sprint across the beach, her boots sinking into the wet sand. Waves lapped at her ankles as she ran, the chill biting into her calves. The sound of heavy breathing and shouted cadence surrounded her. 30 men trying to outpace one another, trying to prove something. She ran in silence. "Come on, Brooks. Thought you were faster than that," one of them yelled with a mocking grin. She didn't respond. Words wasted oxygen. Oxygen meant survival. For Elena, this wasn't just a test of endurance. It was legacy. Her father, Commander Nathan Brooks, had served as a Navy officer for 22 years. He had died overseas in a classified operation when she was 16. Growing up, she had promised herself that his flag wouldn't be the last one flying for the Brooks family. Every bruise, every drop of sweat, every moment of humiliation since entering the Naval Academy had been a step toward this. After the beach run came the obstacle course, cargo nets, rope climbs, barbed wire crawls, and 10-foot walls slick with morning dew. The instructors called it the grinder. It wasn't meant to build muscle. It was meant to break minds. Elena moved like clockwork, precise, efficient, methodical. Her smaller frame allowed her to slip under obstacles faster, climb with better agility. She wasn't the strongest, but she was the most focused. Yet no matter how disciplined she was, whispers always followed. She's only here because of politics. She won't last another month. She gets someone hurt. Even among men who respected the uniform, there were lines they hadn't learned to cross yet, and Elena was standing right on one of them. When the drill instructor blew the final whistle, the group gathered around a rusted Humvee at the edge of the course. Their next exercise was a hostage extraction simulation, a field drill combining tactics, teamwork, and endurance. It would take place in the wooded terrain beyond the base perimeter. The instructor, a tall man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, paced in front of them. "Listen up. This isn't a race. This is coordination. You fail to work as a unit, you fail the mission. Understood?" A chorus of "yes, sir" followed. But behind those affirmations, a few sets of eyes exchanged silent messages. Among them was Petty Officer Ray Dalton, a broad-shouldered man with a smirk that rarely left his face. He had made it clear from day one that he didn't think women belonged in this program. Every chance he got, he found subtle ways to challenge her authority, to push her boundaries. That morning, as they prepared for the drill, his smirk looked sharper. "Hope you can keep up, Brooks," he said. She glanced at him briefly. "Hope you can follow orders," she replied. A few of the others laughed under their breath. Dalton's grin vanished. The team moved into formation, their rifles slung low, their gear strapped tight. The mission: infiltrate a simulated enemy camp, retrieve a hostage, and extract without being detected. Sounds simple, until you factor in mud, exhaustion, and live observation by commanders evaluating every move. Unbeknownst to them, Commander Jack Rains, one of the Navy's most respected SEAL officers, had decided to personally oversee this drill. He watched from a mobile command post, a cup of black coffee in hand, his gaze fixed on the live drone feed above the trainees. Rains had seen hundreds of soldiers train and fail on this ground. But something about Elena's composure caught his eye. The drill began. The team spread out into the forest, moving in pairs. The trees formed a dense canopy overhead, and shafts of light pierced the fog in narrow beams. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. Every sound seemed amplified: boots crunching, deer clinking, the faint rustle of leaves. At first, everything followed the plan. Elena stayed near the center, guiding her half of the team using hand signals. She wasn't the designated leader, but her instincts often filled in where others hesitated. Then, without warning, things went wrong. As they neared the objective, Dalton and two others broke formation, circling behind her. She turned to signal them back and froze. Their expressions weren't tactical. They were predatory. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. "Just a little side test," Dalton sneered. "Let's see if you're really SEAL material." Before she could react, one of them lunged, knocking her backward into the dirt. Her rifle flew from her hands. Pain exploded across her shoulder as she hit the ground hard. She scrambled, kicked one man in the chest, rolled away, and came up swinging. "Stop! This isn't part of the—" A punch cut her sentence short. She blocked another, twisting her attacker's arm and driving her knee into his ribs. He grunted, staggering back. The other two circled her like wolves. But Elena was not prey. She ducked under a swing, drove her elbow into Dalton's jaw, then spun, using her momentum to sweep another man's legs out from under him. Her breathing was sharp, calculated, each movement a blend of training and survival instinct. Yet she was outnumbered, 3 against 1. A fist caught her cheek. Another blow slammed into her ribs. She gasped, dropping to one knee, dirt mixing with blood on her face. "Enough!" she shouted. But they didn't stop. Somewhere far above, the drone camera captured everything: the punches, the kicks, the deliberate cruelty. And in the command post, Commander Rain's jaw clenched. He slammed his coffee down, eyes narrowing. "Get me the field team," he ordered. Now. Back in the forest, Elena refused to stay down. She tackled one man to the ground, landing 2 rapid strikes before being yanked back by her collar. She spun, grabbed Dalton's wrist, twisted, and heard a snap. His howl echoed through the trees. Rains arrived moments later, his presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Stand down." His voice boomed. The attackers froze mid-motion, turning in shock. Rains stepped forward, eyes cold as steel. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dalton clutched his wrist, grimacing. "Sir, it was a test, just—" Rain's voice cut through him like gunfire. "A test? You assaulted your own teammate during a live drill. You crossed every code this uniform stands for." He looked at Elena. Her lip was bleeding, her eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. She stood tall despite the bruises. Rains turned back to the men. "You 3 report to command. Now, don't say a word." They hesitated. His next words carried the quiet threat of a man who had seen combat. "Move or I'll move you." They obeyed. As they vanished into the trees, Rains looked back at Elena. "You all right, Lieutenant?" She nodded stiffly. "I've been through worse." Rains' expression softened slightly, just for a moment. "Not on my base, you haven't." He paused, then added quietly, "You held your ground. That says more about you than their actions ever will." She gave a small nod. her breathing finally slowing. As the medics approached, Rains glanced up at the sky where the drone hovered, still recording. He knew this was just the beginning. By the time this footage reached higher command, lines would be drawn. But one thing was certain. Those men had no idea what storm they'd just unleashed. And Elena Brooks, bruised but unbroken, had just proven she was far more than they ever imagined. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the three men froze under Commander Jack Rains' glare. The air was thick with the smell of pine, sweat, and fear. Birds scattered from the treetops as he stepped forward, boots crunching against the wet leaves. Every muscle in his body was taut, trained for years to detect danger, and he recognized immediately that this was not part of the drill. It was something far more sinister, deliberate aggression. Elena, still kneeling in the mud, wiped a streak of blood from her cheek. Her uniform was torn, her hair damp with sweat and rain, but her hazel eyes burned like wildfire. The anger and disbelief in them was almost palpable, a combination of outrage and self-control. She didn't flinch as Rains approached, though her body ached. She had learned early that fear could kill you faster than a bullet ever could. Dalton swallowed hard, trying to find a clever excuse, but nothing came. The other two trainees stood frozen, uncertainty etched on their faces, as if some invisible wall had stopped their lungs from working. "This isn't a drill," Rains said calmly, but his voice carried an authority that could bend steel. "It's not practice. It's assault. And you just failed everything you claim to represent." Dalton opened his mouth, tried to say, "We were testing her," but Rains didn't give him the chance. His eyes, sharp and cold, cut through the forest like a razor. "Testing? Testing what? How much pain she can take before you break her. How much hatred you can hide under a uniform. Do you have any idea what you just did?" The words hit harder than any physical strike could. The men's bravado evaporated in seconds, replaced by panic and shame. They could feel the weight of every mistake, every violation of trust, crushing them in that moment. Rains took another step closer, his shadow falling over Dalton. "You want to know what a real SEAL looks like?" His gaze flicked to Elena. "This is her. She's not afraid. She's not here to be humiliated. She's here to lead, to survive, to embody everything you will never understand." Elena struggled to her feet, brushing mud from her uniform. Her shoulder throbbed, her ribs ached, but her posture remained proud and unyielding. She felt the pain, but refused to let it define her. Pain was a teacher, not a weapon. Rains nodded once at her, a silent acknowledgement of her resolve. "Lieutenant Brooks, you handled yourself exactly as a SEAL should. Not a word of hesitation, not a shred of fear. That's how you survive this world. That's how you earn respect, through action, not intimidation." The three men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Their attempts at dominance had failed spectacularly, and now they were facing someone who would not tolerate cowardice. Rains didn't raise his voice further. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone, the clarity of his judgment, and the undeniable truth of their behavior spoke for themselves. "Get your weapons and gear," Rains continued, his voice steady. "We're walking back to base. You'll explain this to the command. Every second of this will be reviewed. Every action accounted for. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Dalton muttered, voice barely audible. Rains' gaze swept the group. "Good. And Lieutenant Brooks, you stay put. Medics are on their way. You've earned a moment to breathe." Elena exhaled, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but relief seeped in. She had survived, not just physically, but mentally. Her body was battered, her uniform torn, but her dignity remained intact. As they walked back toward the clearing, Rains stayed close, ensuring no further harassment. He could feel the tension in the men behind him, the guilt simmering under their skin. In the world of the SEALs, reputation and honor were everything. Once shattered, they rarely healed. When they reached the clearing, the medics rushed to Elena, checking her for injuries. She allowed them to examine her silently, answering questions with short, factual statements. She didn't want pity. She didn't want headlines. She wanted to continue, to prove that this attack had not broken her spirit. Minor bruises, some swelling, nothing critical, one medic reported. You're lucky this wasn't worse. Elena nodded, her eyes still flicking to Dalton, and the other two. Their expressions were a mix of fear and resentment, the realization sinking in that their actions would have consequences far beyond the drill. Rains addressed the group, his voice calm but firm. You're here to learn, to train, and to operate as a unit. If any of you cannot do that without resorting to cowardly behavior, you will not wear this uniform for long. He paused, letting the words settle like weight in the air. You will respect your fellow soldiers. You will respect your mission. And most importantly, you will respect yourself. Anyone who fails to understand, that will answer for it. Elena felt a quiet gratitude toward him. He hadn't spared her feelings, and he hadn't coddled her. But he had stepped in when it mattered most, and that distinction made all the difference. After the medics finished, Rains walked her aside. They were alone for a moment, the noise of the bass fading into a distant hum. You handled that exceptionally, he said, his tone low but sincere. Most people would have crumbled. Most people would have let their anger cloud their judgment. But you stayed disciplined. That's why you're here. That's why you're worth watching. Elena's lips pressed together. I just did what I had to do. I wasn't thinking about being watched. Rains nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Good, always keep that focus. It's what keeps people alive in the field, in situations far worse than a drill. For a moment, she let herself absorb the praise. It wasn't a pat on the back. It wasn't encouragement meant to flatter. It was acknowledgement from someone who understood the true cost of being a warrior, and who saw the steel in her that most of her peers refused to recognize. Behind them, the three men were escorted to a temporary holding area, each escorted by another officer. Dalton's face was pale, his jaw clenched. He kept glancing at Elena, a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief in his eyes. The reality was sinking in. What they had done was no longer hidden, no longer excusable. Rains watched silently. In his years of service, he had seen many trainees break under pressure, succumb to fear, or lash out in frustration. But rarely had he seen someone endure hostility with such focus and composure. This isn't the end, Rains said quietly to Elena. It's the beginning. They'll be held accountable. The base will know exactly what happened. And you keep training. Keep learning. Keep getting stronger. Nothing will stop you if you stay this disciplined. Elena nodded, determination reigniting in her chest. The forest around them, still wet and misty, felt different now. The danger had passed, for the moment. But the lesson lingered. In a world built on strength, courage, and honor, betrayal and cowardice would never win. Not while she and people like Rains were watching. And somewhere deep in her mind, she vowed that she would not just survive this environment, she would thrive in it. She would become the soldier her father would have been proud to see. And she would make sure that anyone who dared attack her again would face consequences far more severe than a bruised ego. Rains placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Ready to get back to it? He asked. Elena straightened, wiped mud from her uniform, and gave a tight nod. Always. He allowed himself a brief nod of approval before turning toward the path that led back to the main base. Behind them, the storm of whispers, Fear and humiliation followed the attackers. Behind her, a quiet resolve solidified. This drill, this moment, had changed everything. Commander Jack Rains had intervened once, but he had also set in motion a chain of events that would ensure justice, discipline, and respect. For Elena Brooks, the next phase of her training had begun. Not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a warrior. And the base would never forget it. The sun rose the next morning over Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, but the atmosphere felt heavy, tense, almost electric. Word of the previous day's incident had spread faster than wildfire through the base. By breakfast, small clusters of trainees whispered in corners, their glances darting toward Lieutenant Elena Brooks and Commander Jack Rains, who walked together toward the training grounds. Rumors and opinions spread like a contagion. Some called Elena a hero, a soldier who had stood her ground and refused to submit to intimidation. Others muttered behind her back, labeling her as disruptive, as someone who had brought embarrassment to the unit. Elena knew the whispers existed, but she refused to acknowledge them. Every word spoken against her was just noise. Her mind was focused on training, on mastering skills, on surviving the grind of a program that had already pushed her to the edge. She had no illusions. The path she had chosen was not easy, and every day would test her resilience. Yet, the attack from the previous day had changed something. It had lit a fire within her, a burning determination to prove her worth not as a woman in a male-dominated program, but as a soldier capable of enduring anything. The men who had attacked her were kept on restricted duty, confined to quarters with limited training and constant supervision. But their whispers and sneers did not stop. If anything, their frustration grew with every passing hour. Petty Officer Dalton fumed silently in his bunk, pacing back and forth, replaying the incident in his mind. The humiliation he felt had cut deeper than any punch could. He had believed he could assert dominance, and instead, he had been publicly humiliated by someone he considered lesser. It was a blow to his ego, and he hated it. Rains, aware of the tension, had not left Elena to navigate it alone. He kept a careful watch on her, sometimes from a distance, sometimes offering subtle advice. "Focus," he told her quietly during morning drills. "Let them talk. Your actions will always speak louder than their words. Strength and discipline will always win over arrogance." Elena had nodded, absorbing the advice without a word. She had learned early that lectures were meaningless compared to proof through action. Meanwhile, the base itself felt divided. Some of the older, more experienced SEALs whispered their support for Elena privately. "She's got the eyes for it," one muttered to another. "Focus, discipline. She doesn't flinch under pressure. I'd follow her anywhere." Others, particularly those who were more traditional or skeptical, questioned her presence. "She'll break eventually," a trainee said during a morning run. "No woman can handle this long term. She's bound to make mistakes." The tension created an invisible rift across the unit, some quietly rooting for her, others silently hoping she would fail. Elena trained harder than ever. Physical pain was familiar now. Minor bruises and soreness were temporary, and mental endurance was what mattered most. She doubled her hours on obstacle courses, ran longer distances, and practiced combat drills repeatedly until her arms shook and her legs burned. Sleep became a luxury, often interrupted by nightmares of confrontation. But every time she felt exhaustion creep in, she remembered her father's voice. "Pain is just the price of progress. Never let it own you." One afternoon, Rains approached her as she stretched after a grueling cardio session. "You're pushing too hard," he said calmly. "Focus, not frenzy. Discipline, not desperation. There's a difference." Elena wiped sweat from her brow. "I can't let them think I'm weak," she said quietly. Rain's eyes softened slightly. You're not weak. And strength isn't shown by pushing past your limits blindly. It's shown in control, in composure, in patience. The words stayed with her. She nodded, understanding that resilience was more than just enduring pain. It was knowing how to harness it. But the politics of the base continued to ripple. Some trainees began actively trying to undermine her, spreading false stories, questioning her decisions during drills, and subtly sabotaging her performance. During team exercises, Dalton and his cohort occasionally whispered instructions in a tone meant to confuse her. Elena noticed, but she refused to engage in their games. Instead, she stayed focused, countering misdirection with observation and patience. Every move she made was calculated, deliberate, proving herself silently but clearly. The attackers, confined and watched, grew increasingly desperate. Their whispers turned to mutters, mutters to arguments, and arguments to threats among themselves. The reality of the consequences for their actions, disciplinary hearings, the potential end of their careers, had begun to sink in. Rain's intervention had already changed the trajectory of their military future. They had thought the attack would go unnoticed, a minor incident hidden among the rigorous chaos of training. Instead, it had been captured on multiple cameras, verified by witnesses, and documented meticulously. Rains also began collecting additional evidence, logs, timestamps, and recorded interviews. Every detail mattered. If the men thought they could manipulate perception or cover their actions, they were wrong. Discipline in the SEALs was absolute, and Rains knew that holding people accountable was critical for maintaining the integrity of the program. He also began observing Elena more closely, not because she needed protection, but because he recognized the unique potential in her. Elena, for her part, remained focused on the mission, excellence. Each morning she woke before sunrise, pushing her body further, perfecting her aim, honing tactical decisions. She knew that every demonstration of skill, every display of composure, was another argument against those who doubted her. She did not seek recognition, but recognition came nonetheless. Her peers began to notice, some grudgingly, some admiringly, that she was not just surviving, but excelling. By the end of the week, tension within the base had reached a tipping point. Whispers had transformed into heated discussions, and some senior trainees began to take sides. A faction quietly supported Elena, acknowledging her skill, her determination, and her courage. Another faction clung to traditionalist views, questioning her place, doubting her endurance, and spreading rumor. The division was palpable, a quiet storm that affected every interaction. Despite the tension, Elena kept moving forward. She trained through pain, focused on precision, and refused to let others' opinions distract her. Rains continued to guide her, providing mentorship that went beyond skill training. He taught strategy, patience, and observation. He emphasized that true strength was as much mental as it was physical. One evening, after an exhausting day of drills, Elena sat alone on a dock overlooking the water, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. The orange glow reflected off the waves, painting the horizon in streaks of fire and gold. She thought about the attack, the humiliation, and the whispers that followed. She realized something profound. This challenge was not just about surviving a brutal training program. It was about proving to herself, to the Navy, and to every doubter that she could endure, rise, and thrive. The quiet moment was interrupted by Rains approaching silently. He leaned against the railing beside her. "You've got grit, Lieutenant," he said simply. "And you've got control. Don't confuse endurance with strength. You have both." Elena looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once, then turned his gaze toward the base, where lights flickered in the distance, illuminating the paths of soldiers moving through the night. "Remember," he said softly, The base is divided, but that division is temporary. Discipline, focus, and integrity always rise above. Elena absorbed his words, letting them sink in. She knew the coming days would be challenging. The investigation into the attack would escalate, rumors would continue, and her every action would be scrutinized. But she also knew that with patience, strategy, and relentless effort, she could not just survive, she could lead. As the night deepened, the water reflected the stars above. The attack had tested her body and her mind, but Elena had survived, unbroken. And for the first time since stepping onto the base, she felt not just defiance, but power. The storm of whispers, doubt, and hostility was still there, but it would not consume her. It would forge her. And deep in the shadows of the base, Dalton and the others knew, with growing dread, that the consequences of their actions were only just beginning. Elena turned her gaze forward, toward the dark horizon where the next challenge awaited. She was ready, because no one who underestimated her would escape unscathed. By the following morning, the atmosphere on Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek had shifted. What had begun as a brutal encounter during a drill had grown into something far more serious. The commanding officers had convened an official investigation to determine exactly what had transpired in the woods, and the base was buzzing with quiet tension. Every trainee, instructor, and officer knew that the incident involving Lieutenant Elena Brooks was no longer just a rumor. It was a matter of record, and accountability would be demanded. Elena, for her part, faced the situation with the same calm she had exhibited during the ambush. She had learned early in life that truth carried its own weight, stronger than gossip, louder than threats. While some whispered about her behind closed doors, she kept her focus razor-sharp. She trained, ran drills, and prepared herself mentally, knowing the investigation could be just as grueling as the physical challenges she had endured. Commander Jack Rains took a central role in ensuring the process was thorough and just. He had spent the night compiling evidence, timestamps from drone footage, witness testimonies from fellow trainees who had seen the attack unfold, and detailed logs of drill procedures. Rains understood that the Navy was as much a system of rules and documentation as it was a crucible of endurance. Without clear, undeniable proof, the attackers could claim misunderstanding or manipulation. He would see to it that the truth emerged untainted. The investigation formally began in the administrative conference room, a sterile space filled with navy blue walls and fluorescent lights. The three men who had assaulted Elena, Petty Officer Dalton and his two cohorts, were brought in first, escorted by security. Their faces were pale, the confidence of the previous day replaced by unease. Even they could feel the weight of the cameras, the recording devices, and the silent, piercing gaze of the officers conducting the inquiry. Dalton tried to muster his usual bravado. "It wasn't like it looked, sir," he said, his voice faltering. "It was just a test. A drill. We were checking limits, that's all." Rains cut him off without a word, stepping into the room with a presence that made everyone still. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard and unwavering. "A test?" he asked slowly. "You assaulted your teammate outside of protocol. That isn't a test. That's assault. You know the difference, and you chose to ignore it." The investigators glanced at the assembled evidence. There were multiple drone feeds, capturing the attack from different angles. Audio logs from the drill instructors' radios recorded the chaos. Witness statements confirmed the assault, detailing each blow and the intentional harassment that had preceded it. The evidence left little room for interpretation. This was not an accident, nor a misunderstanding. Elena entered the room under escort. She walked with purpose, each step deliberate. Her uniform was clean, pressed, but the faint traces of bruising on her jaw and shoulder remained visible, proof of her ordeal. She did not lower her eyes, nor did she shrink. She took a seat, her back straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The lead investigator, a stern Navy officer with decades of experience, asked her to recount the events. She spoke clearly, concisely, without emotion, but with undeniable authority. "I was ambushed by 3 team members during a live drill," she said. "This was not part of the exercise. I defended myself to prevent further injury. All actions I took were in accordance with training and survival protocol." Her statement was simple, factual, and precise. Yet the weight behind her words resonated through the room. There was no embellishment, no dramatization, just the truth. And in that room, truth carried the heaviest weight of all. Rains added his testimony, his calm but firm voice narrating the events from an observer's perspective. He outlined how he had intervened, stopped the assault, and ensured Elena's safety. He described the attacker's behavior with clarity and precision, noting the breach of discipline, ethics, and Navy code. The investigators listened intently, occasionally glancing at the video evidence, their faces growing more resolute. Outside the investigation room, whispers of the ongoing inquiry spread rapidly. Trainees speculated, some supporting Elena silently, others trying to rationalize the attacker's actions. The base was divided, but this investigation had made one thing clear. No one, regardless of rank or gender, could act with impunity. As the investigation proceeded, Rains worked closely with Elena, not to shield her, but to prepare her for scrutiny. "They will try to challenge your recollection," he warned quietly during a break. "They may try to cast doubt on your motives. Stay calm, stick to the facts. Discipline and composure will carry you further than anger ever could." Elena nodded, internalizing his guidance. She knew the attackers would attempt to twist reality, but truth was on her side. She had endured the attack, survived it, and now had the opportunity to see justice served. Meanwhile, the attackers were beginning to fracture under pressure. Dalton and his cohorts whispered among themselves, trying to construct excuses, but the evidence was overwhelming. They realized that their actions had crossed a line, one that could cost them their careers. Their arrogance was replaced by fear, and their defiance, once loud and confident, had become quiet and uncertain. Rains observed this quietly, noting the subtle signs of guilt and realization. The Navy, he knew, was not just a test of physical skill, but also of moral character. Those who failed that test often paid a heavy price, and it was about to happen. During the hearing, Rains also introduced interviews with other trainees who had witnessed the incident. Their accounts corroborated Alana's story, describing the unprovoked attacks, the deliberate targeting, and the aggression displayed by Dalton and his cohort. Each testimony painted a clear picture. This was harassment disguised as training. The investigation also uncovered a troubling pattern. Dalton and one of the others had previous minor disciplinary incidents, instances of insubordination, and documented complaints from peers. While none had resulted in formal punishment, the inquiry revealed a pattern of behavior: intimidation, aggression, and attempts to assert dominance through fear. The Navy would not ignore this history. For Elena, the process was exhausting. Every day was filled with questioning, review, and observation. She trained relentlessly in parallel, pushing her body and mind, refusing to let the attackers' attempts to undermine her affect her focus. Sleep was sparse, and moments of doubt crept in, but she pressed forward, guided by discipline and determination. Rains watched her progress closely, offering guidance when needed. He reinforced that endurance was not just physical, but mental, and that navigating the politics of the base, the whispers, and the investigations was as critical as any drill. Strength, he told her, is not just surviving the field. It's surviving people's doubt, their fear, and their underhandedness. That's what separates warriors from pretenders. As the days passed, the investigation reached a tipping point. Evidence, testimony, and Rain's authoritative account left the board with little room to maneuver. Dalton and his cohort could attempt excuses, but they would be hollow. Their arrogance had blinded them to the reality of discipline and accountability. Elena, for her part, began to feel a quiet shift among the trainees. Those who had mocked or doubted her began to recognize her composure, her strength, and her resilience. Respect, though grudging, started to grow. She was no longer just a lone woman in a male-dominated program. She was a soldier who had proven herself under extreme circumstances. At night, after long hours of questioning and training, Elena would sit alone on the base docks, watching the calm waves of the Atlantic. The investigation loomed over her, but it also reinforced her resolve. She had survived an attack, endured scrutiny, and faced a system that often favored hierarchy over justice. Yet here she was, unbroken, focused, and growing stronger with each passing day. Rains joined her one evening, standing silently beside her. "The system isn't perfect," he said quietly. "It protects some, punishes others, and sometimes rewards nothing at all. But in your case, Lieutenant, justice is on your side. You have the facts, the witnesses, and the evidence. All you have to do is remain steady. Let the truth speak louder than anyone's lies." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. This was no longer about proving herself to a group of doubters. It was about demonstrating that integrity, courage, and discipline would always prevail, even in the face of cruelty. In the shadows of the base, Dalton and his accomplices realized the depth of their predicament. The investigation was thorough, precise, and merciless, and their attempts to manipulate perception had failed. They had underestimated Elena, and they had underestimated Commander Rains. Every misstep, every act of aggression, had been recorded, analyzed, and preserved. Their careers, once secure in their arrogance, now hung by a thread. For Elena, the investigation marked a turning point. She had survived the attack, she had endured scrutiny, and she had emerged stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. The base remained divided, whispers still circulating, but a new respect was forming quietly. People began to realize that she was not just enduring, she was excelling, silently but unmistakably, and that resilience would not be ignored. The storm of politics, fear, and ego continued to swirl around her, but Elena had found her anchor: discipline, truth, and unwavering focus. And for the first time, she sensed that the real battle, the one of justice and recognition, was approaching its moment of reckoning. The Navy, the attackers, and even the skeptics would soon learn that the cost of underestimating Lieutenant Elena Brooks was far higher than they had imagined. And Commander Rains, observing from the wings, knew that the stage was set for the final test, not just of physical endurance, but of integrity, courage, and unyielding resolve. By the 5th day following the attack, news of the incident had leaked beyond the base gates. A casual observer would have thought it was a typical drill gone wrong, but inside the Navy, the story carried gravity. Once the whispers of the base reached journalists, they spread like wildfire across local and national media. Headlines screamed across news websites and social media feeds. Female Navy SEAL trainee assaulted during drill. Bravery under fire. Woman confronts harassment in elite training. Navy SEAL training controversy. Assault or test of courage. For Elena Brooks, the sudden attention was overwhelming. She had never sought publicity. Her goal had always been discipline, mastery, and honoring her father's legacy. Yet now, her name was splashed across televisions, newspapers, and online forums. Everywhere she went, eyes followed, whispers turned into comments, and strangers offered opinions on what she should have done, could have done, or supposedly failed to do. Commander Rains noticed her tension immediately. "Ignore it," he said quietly during a training session. his voice calm yet firm. Focus on your mission. Don't let the noise steal your attention. Results will speak louder than headlines. She nodded, absorbing his words. Discipline was her anchor, and Rain's guidance reminded her why she had survived not only the attack, but the relentless scrutiny that followed. She had learned that attention could be both a weapon and a distraction, and she refused to let it control her. The media frenzy brought both support and criticism. Social media erupted with debate. Some hailed Elena as a symbol of courage, determination, and equality in one of the toughest military programs in the world. She didn't just survive. She dominated, one post read. Others questioned her presence in the Navy SEAL program, arguing that women could not withstand the intensity of the training. Trolls and critics surfaced quickly, amplifying doubts and negativity with hashtags and viral commentary. Inside the base, the media firestorm had real consequences. Officers felt the pressure from higher command to demonstrate that justice was being served. Investigators intensified their work, reviewing footage, conducting interviews, and preparing formal reports. Every detail mattered, because now the Navy's reputation was under scrutiny. What had been an internal incident was now a matter of public perception. Dalton and his accomplices felt the impact immediately. The men who had attacked Elena were no longer just facing disciplinary hearings, they were facing public condemnation, professional humiliation, and the terrifying possibility that their careers could end before they even truly began. Their confidence, once unshakable, was replaced by desperation. Why is this getting so much attention? Dalton muttered to one of his cohorts in their temporary holding quarters. It's just a drill. It's supposed to be private. It's not private when someone records it and the commander decides to act, the other replied, his voice trembling. And when the media gets involved, forget it. Our lives are over. Meanwhile, Elena continued her routine as though nothing had changed. She ran her drills, worked on tactical exercises, and honed her skills under Rain's supervision. The media attention made her hyper-aware of the weight she carried, but it did not break her focus. If anything, it amplified her determination. She knew that the scrutiny was temporary, but her skill, discipline, and courage were permanent. Rains watched her silently, observing not just her physical performance, but her mental resilience. He knew that public attention could be a double-edged sword. It could inflate egos, distract focus, or even provoke backlash. But Elena managed it with composure, never speaking to journalists directly, never posting on social media, and never allowing herself to be drawn into arguments. She let her actions continue to define her. The Navy, under pressure from public opinion, scheduled a formal press briefing. Officials carefully worded statements praising Elena's composure while assuring the public that disciplinary measures were underway. The Navy does not tolerate harassment or assault of any kind, one spokesperson stated. We are committed to ensuring a safe and professional training environment for all personnel. Investigations are ongoing, and appropriate actions will be taken. The briefing only fueled media coverage further. Television anchors replayed segments of the training, analysts debated the nature of SEAL training, and political commentators argued over military culture. Elena's life, once private and focused on training, had become public property. Despite the chaos, she remained steadfast. Her peers who had once mocked or doubted her began to recognize a new reality. Those who had supported her silently felt vindicated. The division within the base started to shift as respect for Elena's skill, resilience, and leadership became undeniable. Rains also used the media firestorm strategically. By allowing public attention, he ensured that the Navy could no longer ignore the behavior of Dalton and his cohort. Public scrutiny guaranteed accountability in a way internal systems alone could not. He coached Elena to maintain discipline, letting facts and performance speak louder than emotion or rhetoric. Then came the first formal confrontation in the media. A local news segment featured interviews with former SEALs, analysts, and veterans. "This is not about gender," one veteran stated. "It's about discipline, integrity, and courage." Lieutenant Brooks displayed all three under extreme provocation. Another expert, less supportive, commented, "While her resilience is commendable, the situation highlights the tension in integrating women into elite combat programs." Elena did not respond. She did not need to. Her performance on the field, her composure under attack, and her unwavering determination were proof enough. The evidence, the video footage, Rain's testimony, and the detailed witness accounts would speak for itself. As the media coverage grew, the attackers felt increasing pressure. Their families began receiving calls, their reputations within the Navy were questioned, and higher command demanded immediate action. Anxiety replaced arrogance. The very public nature of the incident ensured that no excuses would be tolerated. For Elena, the attention brought an unexpected sense of empowerment. While she had not sought fame, she realized that her example could inspire others, both women and men, to stand firm in the face of aggression. Her actions became a silent message to the Navy and to the world. Integrity and courage matter, even when others attempt to diminish them. One evening, after an intense day of drills, Elena sat alone on the base docks. The orange glow of the setting sun reflected off the water, mirroring the fiery determination inside her. She thought about the attack, the investigation, and the growing media storm. She realized that while the external chaos was beyond her control, her response was entirely within her power. Discipline, focus, and composure, those were her weapons. Rains approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The world is watching now," he said softly. "Some will support you, some will criticize. But what matters is what you do next. Continue to train, continue to lead, and continue to embody the values that got you here. Everything else is noise." Elena nodded, absorbing his words. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself a quiet smile. The storm of attention was inevitable, but she would not be defined by it. She would define herself through action, strength, and unwavering resolve. Inside the base, the ripple effects of the media coverage were profound. The attackers were acutely aware that their actions were now scrutinized by both the Navy and the public. They realized that the consequences of underestimating Elena Brooks extended far beyond a single drill. Their careers, reputations, and credibility were in jeopardy, and they had only themselves to blame. Meanwhile, Elena continued to train under Rain's guidance. Her focus remained unshakable, her discipline unwavering, and her determination stronger than ever. She had survived an attack, endured the scrutiny of the investigation, and now faced the glare of public attention. And through it all, she remained unbroken, a soldier in every sense of the word. The media firestorm would eventually settle, but its impact was lasting. It had brought scrutiny, pressure, and visibility, forcing accountability for those who had acted recklessly. And for Elena Brooks, it had reaffirmed her purpose: to train harder, lead with integrity, and prove that courage, resilience, and discipline could overcome any obstacle in the quiet of the docks. With the sun sinking into the Atlantic, Elena allowed herself a moment of reflection. She knew the challenges were far from over. Dalton and his cohort would face the full weight of their actions, and the Navy would continue to observe her every move. But she was ready. The storm of public attention, the scrutiny of command, and the whispers of skeptics could not shake her. She had endured the worst, and now she would thrive, proving that strength, courage, and integrity always rise above fear, cruelty, and doubt. And in the shadows of the base, Commander Rains watched quietly, knowing that the stage was set for the next phase, the final reckoning for the attackers and the true validation of Elena Brooks. Extraordinary resolve. The day of the thaw. Military hearing arrived like a storm on the horizon. Inside the Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek Conference Hall, the air was tense, sharp with anticipation. Rows of officers, senior trainers, and select witnesses filled the room, while the three men who had assaulted Lieutenant Elena Brooks were brought in under strict supervision. Their faces were pale, stiff with anxiety, as the reality of their actions finally sank in. This was not a drill. This was accountability, and it was inescapable. Elena entered alongside Commander Jack Rains, her uniform pristine, her demeanor calm yet commanding. Every step she took resonated with quiet authority. She didn't glance at the attackers. Their presence mattered less than her own focus. She had been here before, under physical attack, under mental scrutiny, under the glare of the media, and now she would face formal military scrutiny. The hearing was simply another test, one she was ready for. The room fell silent as the presiding officer, Rear Admiral Susan Hightower, took her seat at the head of the board. Hightower's reputation preceded her, known for her rigor, fairness, and unwavering commitment to Navy protocol. She commanded respect without raising her voice. "Lieutenant Brooks," she began, her tone firm but neutral. "Please recount the events of the drill on the morning of March 4th, including the assault you experienced." Elena took a deep breath, her posture perfect, her eyes steady. "On the morning of March 4th, she began, during a live tactical drill, I was deliberately attacked by three members of my team, Petty Officer Ray Dalton, Petty Officer Mark Simmons, and Petty Officer Carl Hastings. Their actions were unprovoked, outside the scope of the exercise, and constituted physical assault. I defended myself in accordance with Navy protocol to prevent further injury. Every move I made was tactical, controlled, and in compliance with training standards." The officers on the board listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. The words were precise, factual, and devoid of dramatization, yet they carried undeniable weight. Elena's calm composure contrasted sharply with the nervous, evasive demeanor of the attackers, whose earlier bravado had crumbled under the intense scrutiny. Rear Admiral Hightower turned to Dalton. "Petty Officer Dalton, please explain your actions." Dalton swallowed hard, his voice trembling. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, ma'am. We were testing her limits, seeing if she could handle stress. Stress tests do not include physical assault." Hightower interrupted sharply. "Your actions violated multiple Navy codes, including assault, misconduct, and breach of training protocol. You were entrusted to operate as a team. Instead, you chose to attack a fellow trainee. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Dalton's face went pale. The reality was unmistakable. His arrogance, his sense of superiority, and his attempts to assert dominance through fear had all failed spectacularly. "Yes, ma'am," he muttered. One by one, Simmons and Hastings were questioned. Their defenses were weak, their attempts at rationalization transparent. They had underestimated both Elena's capability and the Navy's commitment to discipline. Every testimony, every piece of evidence, from the drone footage to Rains' observation logs, corroborated Elena's account. Rains stepped forward to provide his testimony. "I was present during the drill," he began. "At no point did Lieutenant Brooks provoke the attack. The actions taken against her were deliberate, unprovoked, and outside the bounds of any training exercise. I intervened immediately to prevent further harm. The intent and conduct of Dalton, Simmons, and Hastings were unacceptable and demonstrate a severe lapse in judgment, discipline, and adherence to Navy values." His words carried the weight of authority, and the board noted every detail carefully. Rains didn't embellish. He presented facts with precision, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. The clarity of his testimony left no room for doubt. Next, Other trainees who had witnessed the assault were called. Each confirmed Elena's version. She had been ambushed. She had defended herself appropriately, and the attackers had acted with malicious intent. The testimonies, taken together, created an unassailable chain of evidence. Dalton attempted one final defense, trying to argue that the incident was a miscommunication during a high-pressure drill. "We didn't mean to. It was confusion." Rear Admiral Hightower's eyes narrowed. This was not confusion. This was assault. You attempted to harm a fellow trainee. You disrupted a live exercise, endangered a teammate, and violated the trust of your unit. Miscommunication does not justify assault. Do you understand? "Yes, ma'am," Dalton said quietly, defeated. The room was heavy with tension. Elena remained silent, her expression calm, almost serene. She knew her role was not to gloat or express anger. Her role was to provide truth, clarity, and composure. Every officer present could see the contrast. She had endured aggression and intimidation, yet maintained integrity and discipline. The attackers had failed at every measure that mattered. After hours of questioning, reviewing footage, and evaluating testimony, the board recessed to deliberate. Elena returned to her quarters, her body tense but her mind sharp. Despite exhaustion from the intense training and media scrutiny, she felt a quiet certainty. The facts were on her side, and the integrity she had maintained under pressure could not be ignored. Meanwhile, Dalton, Simmons, and Hastings sat in another room, their confidence completely eroded. Anxiety and fear replaced their earlier arrogance. They knew the board had every piece of evidence against them. For the first time, they truly understood the consequences of underestimating Elena and violating Navy protocol. Raines remained at the base, reviewing further training logs and monitoring the proceedings. He understood that the hearing was about more than just punishing misconduct. It was about setting a precedent. The Navy needed to demonstrate that discipline, integrity, and accountability were non-negotiable, and that attempts to intimidate or attack a fellow soldier would be met with swift, decisive consequences. Hours later, the board reconvened. Rear Admiral Hightower addressed the room. Based on the evidence, testimony, and review of the incident, the actions of Petty Officer Dalton, Petty Officer Simmons, and Petty Officer Hastings constitute violations of Navy Code, assault, and gross misconduct. Their behavior is unacceptable and will result in the immediate termination of their active training status, pending further administrative review. A collective murmur passed through the room. The attackers' faces reflected shock, fear, and the bitter taste of reality. The consequences were immediate and irrevocable. The careers they had assumed would be secure were now in jeopardy. Elena remained composed. She did not smile. She did not react outwardly. Her victory was not in revenge, but in justice. The Navy had recognized her discipline, courage, and composure. The attackers' actions had been evaluated fairly and decisively, and the truth had prevailed. Raines approached her as the hearing concluded. "You handled yourself perfectly," he said quietly. "Not through anger, not through retaliation, but through focus, discipline, and truth. That's the mark of a true SEAL." Elena nodded, a small, tight-lipped smile forming. "I just did what I had to do, sir." "And that's why you're here," Raines replied. "Not just to survive the training, but to set an example. Today, you did more than survive. You showed the Navy exactly what leadership, courage, and integrity look like under pressure." Outside the conference hall, the base atmosphere shifted. The ripple effect of the hearing was immediate. Trainees who had doubted Elena now watched her with respect. Some still whispered, but those whispers were tempered with admiration. The attackers, meanwhile, were escorted to temporary confinement as further administrative proceedings determined the final outcomes of their careers. The incident had not just resolved a matter of misconduct. It had set a precedent. Elena's composure, her unwavering discipline, and her courage in the face of aggression demonstrated a standard that could not be ignored. The Navy, the media, and her peers now recognized her as a soldier of exceptional resilience and integrity. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the base, Elena stood on the docks once more. The air smelled of salt and diesel, the ocean reflecting streaks of fire and gold. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The physical attacks, the media scrutiny, the intense investigation, and the high-stakes hearing had all tested her, and she had endured. Rains joined her quietly. "This isn't the end," he said. "The attackers will face further review, but today, you've proven something far more important. You've shown that integrity, courage, and discipline can overcome aggression and intimidation. That's a lesson the entire base will remember." Elena looked out at the horizon, feeling a rare moment of satisfaction. She had survived not just the physical trials, but the mental and emotional storms. The path ahead remained challenging, but she had solidified her place, not as a symbol, but as a soldier who had earned respect through action and unwavering resolve. In the shadows of the base, Dalton, Simmons, and Hastings realized the full magnitude of their failure. Their arrogance, aggression, and disrespect had not only cost them credibility, but had also endangered their careers. The consequences would continue, but the message was clear. Lieutenant Elena Brooks had not just survived. She had prevailed. And for the first time, the base, divided by doubt, skepticism, and bias, began to unite under a new understanding: courage. Integrity and discipline would always be recognized, no matter the circumstances. After the conclusion of the military hearing, the atmosphere at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek began to change in subtle but significant ways. The echoes of the previous chaos, the ambush, the media firestorm, and the formal hearing still lingered in the hallways, but the division among the trainees and instructors had started to dissolve. Respect for Lieutenant Elena Brooks was growing quietly, organically, as her resilience and integrity became impossible to ignore. Elena returned to her routine, but this time, the weight she carried felt different. It was no longer tension from whispered doubts or quiet ridicule. It was a responsibility, a reminder that her actions had become a standard for the entire base. Young trainees, especially women, looked to her with a mixture of admiration and inspiration. The realization that someone could endure aggression, media scrutiny, and the rigors of SEAL training while maintaining composure gave them hope that courage and discipline were powerful tools in any environment. Commander Jack Rains noticed this shift immediately. During morning drills, he observed that Alana's peers were watching her more closely, not with skepticism, but with interest and respect. Subtle nods of acknowledgement replaced whispered comments, and even those who had been hostile were beginning to recognize her competence and composure. Rains knew that recognition would take time, but this was the turning point. The Navy, acknowledging both the investigation and the public attention, began to formally recognize Elena's bravery. A commendation was prepared, noting her composure under attack, adherence to protocol, and exemplary display of leadership qualities. The announcement was scheduled for the next assembly, bringing the entire training unit together. On the day of the assembly, the hall was filled with trainees, instructors, and senior officers. The 3 men who had attacked her were notably absent, confined to administrative review and under further disciplinary consideration. All eyes were on Elena as she stood at attention in her uniform, posture immaculate, every detail representing the professionalism she embodied. Rear Admiral Susan Hightower stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Today," she began, "we recognize a trainee whose actions exemplify the core values of the United States Navy: courage, discipline, integrity, and leadership. Lieutenant Elena Brooks faced aggression during a training exercise, maintained composure under intense scrutiny, and demonstrated tactical skill and resilience that set a new standard for this unit. Applause filled the room, hesitant at first, then growing louder as recognition spread from one trainee to another. Elena remained composed, her hands at her sides, her face calm, her gaze forward. She accepted the commendation with dignity, understanding that the real reward was not applause, but the acknowledgement of her capability and character. After the ceremony, Rains approached her quietly. "You've set a precedent," he said softly. "Not just for your peers, but for everyone in this base. They'll remember this day for the rest of their careers." Elena nodded. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "I didn't do it for recognition. I just wanted to survive, to follow the training, and to do what was right." Rains smiled faintly. "And that's why they respect you. Courage isn't about seeking applause. It's about doing what's right when no one is watching, and then standing tall when the world finally sees it." The next few days brought further reflection for Elena. She spent quiet evenings on the docks, watching the waves, replaying events in her mind. The attack, the investigation, the hearing, and the media attention had tested every part of her: physical endurance, mental resilience, and emotional control. She realized that the journey had transformed her. She was no longer just a trainee navigating a brutal program. She was a symbol of integrity and strength, though she never asked for that title. Meanwhile, the three men who had attacked her were facing the consequences. Their actions had been documented thoroughly, scrutinized legally and administratively, and exposed publicly in a controlled, professional manner. They now understood the gravity of underestimating both their peers and the institutional commitment to accountability. Dalton, Simmons, and Hastings had not only failed in the attack, but had set in motion the unraveling of their own careers. The lessons they had failed to learn in discipline, respect, and integrity had caught up with them fully. Back at the base, Elena's peers began approaching her, some tentatively, some with admiration, and some with curiosity. She offered guidance quietly, sharing knowledge when asked, demonstrating leadership through action rather than words. The base's dynamic shifted. The initial hostility, division, and doubt had gradually given way to mutual respect and cooperation. Elena's example had catalyzed change without a single word of confrontation. One afternoon, during a rigorous obstacle course, Rains observed Elena leading a small group of trainees. Her instructions were precise, her demeanor calm yet authoritative, and her peers followed her without question. The respect she had earned was evident in their posture, in their focused execution, and in the unspoken trust that had developed. She was not just surviving the SEAL program. She was shaping it. Outside the base, public attention began to shift. Articles highlighting her composure and leadership circulated widely, featuring commentary from former Navy SEALs, military analysts, and leadership experts. Some framed her as a trailblazer in integrating women into elite military programs, while others focused on her extraordinary resilience under pressure. The narrative emphasized skill, integrity, and courage, not gender, not sensationalism. Elena remained aware of the coverage, but did not engage actively. Her focus remained on the mission, mastering her craft and setting a standard of excellence. During downtime, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The attack during the drill had been a brutal initiation into both the physical and social challenges of the SEAL program. The investigation had been a test of patience and composure. The military hearing had been a trial of integrity and clarity. Each phase had demanded something different: strength, courage, discipline, and unwavering focus. She realized that true leadership was forged in adversity, in moments when choices carried consequences far beyond personal comfort. Rains noticed the transformation in Elena over these weeks. She had evolved from a determined but relatively inexperienced trainee into a figure of influence and respect within the base. "You've learned more than skill," he remarked one evening as they reviewed tactical drills. "You've learned how to navigate challenge, adversity, and scrutiny with grace. That is what sets leaders apart from soldiers." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood that the journey was ongoing. SEAL training was relentless, and future challenges would be no less intense. But the incident, now behind her, had prepared her for the unexpected. She had faced aggression, scrutiny, and institutional pressure, and she had emerged not only intact, but stronger, sharper, and more resilient. Her reflection also brought a quiet sense of responsibility. She recognized that her actions had consequences beyond herself. They inspired others to uphold standards of integrity, encouraged peers to act with courage, and provided a tangible example that harassment and aggression would not be tolerated. She had become a leader not by seeking position or recognition, but by embodying the qualities that the Navy valued most. One evening, she sat on the dock with Rains, the Atlantic stretching endlessly before them. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long streaks of orange and gold across the water. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked quietly. Rains shook his head slightly. "Not yet. For now, the lesson is in what's already happened. You've proven yourself in ways most trainees never will. What comes next will test you in other ways, but you're ready. That's what matters." Elena allowed herself a deep breath, feeling a rare sense of peace. The storm of attack, media attention, and scrutiny was behind her. What remained was focus, on training, on leadership, and on continuing to set the example she had inadvertently become. In the days that followed, the base slowly returned to routine. Training intensified, but with a newfound respect permeating the halls. The attackers faced ongoing administrative review, their careers hanging in balance, serving as a stark warning to anyone considering underhanded aggression. And Elena continued to train, lead, and inspire quietly, her example reinforcing a culture of discipline, courage, and integrity that would endure long after the incident faded from memory. Through every challenge, she had learned an essential truth. Leadership was not granted by rank, recognition, or circumstance. It was forged in adversity, demonstrated in action, and validated through unwavering integrity. And as the sun set over Little Creek, casting long shadows across the base, one thing was clear. Lieutenant Elena Brooks had not just survived, she had transformed the very environment around her, setting a standard that would echo through the Navy for years to come. Weeks had passed since the military hearing, yet the echoes of the incident still lingered at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek. The three men who had assaulted Lieutenant Elena Brooks were now facing the full consequences of their actions. Their administrative reviews had concluded with termination from the SEAL training program, and the Navy had made a public statement reaffirming its commitment to discipline, integrity, and a safe training environment. It was a warning to anyone who might attempt intimidation or aggression. The rules were clear, and no one was above them. For Elena, the conclusion of the hearing and the attacker's dismissal marked more than a personal victory. It symbolized a shift in the culture around her. She continued her rigorous training, pushing herself physically and mentally, but there was a sense of balance now. The tension, fear, and hostility that had once surrounded her had diminished, replaced by respect, admiration, and cautious trust from her peers. Her presence in the program was no longer questioned, it was validated. The Navy recognized her not only for surviving the attack, but for how she conducted herself afterward. Her discipline, composure, and tactical skill under duress had become a benchmark for other trainees. Reports circulated highlighting her calm decision-making, her ability to lead under pressure, and her unwavering adherence to protocol. She became, in the eyes of her instructors and peers, the embodiment of what it meant to be a SEAL: courage, focus, and integrity in the face of adversity. Alana's story also inspired change outside the base. Local news outlets, military publications, and veteran forums shared her journey. Articles emphasized that her courage wasn't just about surviving an assault. It was about demonstrating resilience, discipline, and leadership when challenged. She became a quiet role model, her story encouraging young women and men across the country to pursue their ambitions without fear of intimidation or discrimination. Despite the recognition, Elena remained humble. She trained relentlessly, knowing that the SEAL program was unforgiving and that any lapse in focus could have serious consequences. She often reflected on the journey that had brought her here: the physical challenges, the attacks, the media scrutiny, the investigation, and the military hearing. Each moment had tested her, each obstacle had refined her, and each confrontation had reinforced her resilience. Commander Jack Rains continued to mentor her, observing her growth not just as a trainee, but as a leader. "You've earned respect," he told her one evening as they reviewed tactical exercises, "not through words or attention, but through action. That's what leadership truly looks like. Never forget it." Elena absorbed his words, understanding that the journey was ongoing. Leadership was not static. It was demonstrated daily through decisions, discipline, and courage. She had faced her toughest trial and emerged victorious, but her path was far from complete. There would be more challenges, more drills, and more tests of endurance, both physically and mentally. The aftermath of the incident also brought personal reflection. Elena thought about the attackers, not with bitterness, but with understanding of human failure. Dalton, Simmons, and Hastings had made conscious choices that reflected arrogance, aggression, and a lack of accountability. Their downfall was a result of those choices, not hers. Recognizing this allowed her to focus on what she could control: her performance, her integrity, and her growth. She also reflected on the broader impact of her actions. By standing her ground, maintaining composure, and adhering to protocol, she had helped shift the culture within her unit. Trainees who had once doubted her now looked to her as an example. Instructors began to address harassment and intimidation more directly, and new protocols were reinforced to ensure a safe and professional training environment. Her experience became a catalyst for positive change. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena stood on the base docks once more. The waves of the Atlantic lapped quietly against the pier, a rhythmic reminder of persistence and continuity. She thought about her journey, the attacks, the scrutiny, the investigation, and the hearing, and realized that each moment had strengthened her, refined her character, and prepared her for the challenges ahead. Rains joined her quietly, the two standing in companionable silence as the sky shifted from gold to deep indigo. "You've done more than survive," he said softly. "You've transformed your environment, inspired your peers, and set a standard that will outlast this incident. That's rare. That's leadership." Elena nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. "It wasn't about recognition," she said. "It was about doing what was right and proving to myself that I could handle it." "And that's why it matters," Rains replied. "The Navy, your peers, even those who doubted you, they've all learned from your example. Integrity, courage, and discipline aren't just words. They're actions. And you've proven them in ways no one can ignore." The base itself began to feel different. Training sessions were more focused, peer support increased, and instructors emphasized discipline and accountability more than ever. Elena had unwittingly set a benchmark for how challenges, harassment, and adversity should be met, not with anger or retaliation, but with composure, adherence to protocol, and tactical excellence. Her story even reached other branches of the military. Officers from other bases requested to review the incident, using it as a case study for leadership, integrity, and resilience training. Elena's experience became an example for others, demonstrating that courage was not just physical endurance, but the strength to face adversity with unwavering integrity. Despite the accolades and attention, Elena's focus never wavered. Every day she trained harder, pushed further, and refined her skills. She knew that the SEAL program was relentless, that her journey was ongoing, and that every obstacle was an opportunity to grow. Her victories were not measured in recognition or applause, but in the mastery of her craft and the confidence that she could handle any challenge. The attackers, meanwhile, faced the consequences of their actions fully. Their careers in the Navy SEAL program ended, and the incident served as a cautionary tale within the training community. Their failure contrasted sharply with Elena's perseverance, highlighting the cost of arrogance, aggression, and lack of discipline. Through it all, Elena remained humble. She avoided the spotlight, trained quietly but intensely, and let her actions speak louder than words. The recognition she received, both inside the Navy and externally, was a byproduct of her integrity and resilience, not her ambition. As months passed, Elena reflected on the journey from the initial attack to the conclusion of the military hearing. She recognized that true strength was not in physical dominance, but in discipline, composure, and courage under pressure. She had faced aggression, scrutiny, and the weight of institutional and public attention, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable. One evening, standing on the docks as the sun set over the Atlantic, she allowed herself a quiet moment of triumph. She had endured the worst, the attack, the investigation, the hearing, and had emerged not just intact, but transformed. She had earned respect, inspired change, and set an example that would influence the Navy for years to come. Raines stood beside her, watching the waves. "The world has seen what you're capable of," he said quietly. "But remember, the most important recognition is what you see in yourself. You've faced adversity and proven yourself without compromise. That's something no one can take away." Elena nodded, a sense of calm satisfaction washing over her. The journey had tested her in ways she could never have imagined, but it had also prepared her for anything the future might hold. The legacy she had forged, through courage, integrity, and discipline, was now part of her identity, and it would guide her through every challenge yet to come. In the quiet of the docks, with the sun sinking below the horizon and the waves reflecting streaks of gold and crimson, Lieutenant Elena Brooks finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her triumph. She had survived the attack, endured scrutiny, faced institutional pressure, and emerged stronger than ever. Her journey was far from over, but she had proven one undeniable truth: courage, integrity, and discipline could overcome any challenge.